Hello everyone and welcome to tonight's, or whenever you're watching, this evening's meeting with James Roper, who's going to be hosting a talk on the psychology of the body. Now, I've known James, we were just discussing for almost 10 years now, where we've been in and out of active training together in Manchester and keeping in touch and keeping each other informed of latest developments from afar. It's a great pleasure to have you host this session, mate. So I'll hand over to you.
Hello. Yeah, just a brief bit about me. I'm an artist based in Manchester. So I'm going to show some of my work because it relates in with what I'm going to be talking about. I'll give a brief history of why the kind of psychology of the body ties into my work and why I'm interested in that and how that kind of all intermingled sort of thing. But initially, just to get us kind of a bit more out of our heads and into our bodies, so we're more kind of present. I'm going to start off with some qigong. Yeah, I've been, as Dave says, been studying kung fu, training kung fu since 2009, and part of that has been qigong as part of that training. Initially, I was doing Nampai Tran Shaolin kung fu, and I got my black belt in 2014. And then my Sifu, who was part of that system, branched off and started Jiaofa Chuan, which I've trained in, and that's kind of the basis of my training at the moment. I mean, I branched off and do other things, tried other things out, which I might get into. But yeah, qigong is going to be part of my talk. And I think it's a good practice to have. As well as obviously doing like kind of things like workouts and more kind of active things. It's good to have a more quieter practice, I find, and connecting with the breath. So yeah, if you can, and you don't have to, but if you've got space to stand, if you're shooting socks if you want, because we want to connect with the ground. Can you do this sitting? I'm not sure you can. You can try it if you can't find a space to stand. So I'm just going to unplug myself. So yeah, the basis of what I'm going to talk about is how qigong also relates to something called bioenergetics. So we're going to do something which is similar to bioenergetics just to start off with. And as I say, it's like qigong, so I'm going to tie that back into qigong. So the first thing is to learn the qigong stance, which in bioenergetics is grounding. Can you just give me a thumbs up if you can hear me? Okay, good. I'll keep my voice up. Okay, so the basic qigong stance is to have the feet flat on the floor. So all points of the foot are touching the floor, the toes, the heels, and the outside edge of the foot as flat as you can possibly go with the foot. So we're nice and grounded. We want to soften the knees. So there's a slight bend in the knees, not too much, just so we go out of the kind of rigid stance. And then we're going to tuck our pelvis slightly up. So there's a slight rotation upwards, as if you're tightening your abdominal muscles to pull the pelvis up. Okay, arms nice and relaxed by the sides, shoulders nice and relaxed as well. And we're going to imagine there's a piece of string attached to our crown of our head, and that's going to be pulling directly upwards. So there's a slight lift of the head away from the body, so we're not kind of leaning forward. There's a kind of lightness in the body as well, so it's kind of an upward motion. Again, soften stance in the knees, nice and relaxed. Okay, so that's the basic qigong stance. There's a few more details, but I won't go into it. And just as a grounding technique, which is bioenergetics, we're going to slowly start a vibration from our knees, and it's going to be kind of a soft, kind of up and down momentum, like so. So it's very subtle, but we're feeling a drop in the shoulders, and the arms are nice and loose. So it's kind of a slight kind of shake downwards in the body. and just keep the breath nice and soft. And then once that vibration kind of picks up, I want you to bring the heels off the ground, so there's a drop onto the floor, so the energy is going down into the floor. So that's a basic bioenergetic grounding. I would say you can go further with that, and you can actually leave the floor as well to kind of really ground the body, so the energy is going downwards, again out of the head and into the body. Okay, I'll say a bit about breathing. Breathing is a big part of qigong and bioenergetics. So just so we understand how to breathe a bit deeper than we normally would. There's a tendency, if we're up in our heads a lot, is to have a quite shallow breath. So if you can put one hand on your stomach and one hand on your chest. So the breath is basically, the diaphragm is descending downwards, creating space for the lungs to expand, and also the rib cage is expanding out as well. So to deepen the breath, we're going to imagine our diaphragm. So the diaphragm is moving downwards. So the breath is pushing the diaphragm downwards. We're going to imagine that. So there's going to be, it's said that it should be 2/3 down into the stomach and diaphragm, so extending the stomach slightly out, and then 1/3 in an expansion of the chest. For me personally, it may be different for you. It tends to be two counts into the diaphragm, and then 2 to the chest. So 2 quarters each, but it depends on you. But the main thing is to get that diaphragm to go down, slight extension in the stomach outwards as the breath goes down into the diaphragm, and then the chest opens up as well. So really deepening that breath. So if you want to practice that, so we're going to breathe. First is to breathe in down into the diaphragm. So breathing in, and then the breath has gone in and we can't push down anymore. So then we go into the chest, and the chest is expanding. So that last third or last 2 quarters or half is into the chest, and then just relax the breath out. So breathing down to the diaphragm as much as you can, and then expansion into the chest. And then relax the breath out. So with each breath, try and deepen it. So breathing down into the diaphragm, and then into the chest. So really expanding the chest upwards and out, and then relaxed breath out. Try and soften the knees when you're doing this, still having a qigong stance. Just one more time. Breathing down into the diaphragm, and up into the chest, and then relaxed out. Okay, so having those hands on the chest and the stomach really helps us what's called interoception, which is to feel into the body. Sometimes we just do exercises where we're just doing the breathing, but we don't actually feel where it's going in the body. And I think it's important to have that direct contact with that sometimes. Once you get used to it, you can drop the hands down. Just going to do one more sequence, which is more of a qigong sequence. So again, soles of the feet flat on the floor, soften the knees, tuck the pelvis up slightly, relax shoulders, hands by the side, slight rate pulling on the crown upwards. Okay. So we're going to breathe in, bring the fingers together at the front. So breathing in, and they're going to come up towards the head. And as they go over the head, they turn over the head. So we're still breathing in, and then pushing up, still breathing in, push up. So it should be end like this, end of the out breath, and then out and down by the sides, nice softly down by the sides. Okay, one more, fingers together, breathe in. Up and over the head, still breathing in, down into the diaphragm, into the chest, and out and down. Now this time, instead of the hands going to the front, they're going to come behind us. So behind like this, bringing the hands up as we breathe in, and then down to the front as we breathe out. So starting from the top, soften the stance, breathing in, all the way up, and out, bring the hands down, relax the breath, then bring the hands behind, as if you're lifting a rucksack up off your back, breathing in, bring the hands to the front, breathing out, letting all that weight go at the front. Okay, one more time, breathing in, all the way up, and then out, down, relax down, soften the stance. Okay, lifting that weight off the back, breathing in, and then out and down to the front. So letting all that weight drop to the front. Okay. Okay. So that's the basic qigong, basic bioenergetics, especially concentrating on the breath, which is really important. And you should feel a bit more embodied. The more you, that's kind of like 3 repetitions. The more you do it, the more it becomes not like a rhythm. You feel that expansion of the chest and becomes more of a meditation. For me, I don't particularly like being guided in things because you're constantly listening to someone talking and that's externalizing your thought process. It's good to learn these things, then go away and practice them on your own so that it's more internal, you're more feeling what you're actually doing. Okay, so just gonna attempt to share my screen now. Wait 1 second. Okay, can we all see that? Good, okay. Let me just have a drink. Okay. So as I said, my day job is an artist. My work used to be, and still is, quite expressive and was kind of all about a kind of build up of energy in either my psychology or my physicality, and then a kind of release of that energy. These are kind of 2008 paintings, acrylic on canvas. But at the time, I didn't do any martial arts, didn't do any qigong sport. I did sport when I was younger, but I kind of stopped that. I was very repressed physically and emotionally and mentally. But I still knew something needed to be expressed. So it's almost like my shadow side was being expressed through my work. And again, this is the piece on the left is fairly new, so I'm still working with that physicality and movement, but I'm kind of more aware of what I'm doing and playing with that. Piece on the right is one of my most popular series called the Rapture series, was about the kind of release of sexual energy and the physicality of that. That's something I'll refer to later on. Okay. So yeah, actually, I'll go through, because I'm going to go into psychoanalysis a tiny bit. It's a point part, and I'd like to kind of psychoanalyze myself a bit so you can understand where I'm coming from and why I've kind of become interested in this. Basically, as I said, I was quite repressed up until a certain point. And I felt a kind of need around 2008 to, because I was sat around painting all day and I was very sedentary, and I felt the need to do something physical. I needed to get out of my head. So that's when I started doing martial arts in 2009, and that was very good at getting me more physical. And I started working out, and it was great for me. But it was lacking something. It was very rigid in the way I was expressing myself. It was kind of punching and kicking and these forms where you had to get them absolutely perfect. But there wasn't really. It was very kind of, as I say, narrow way of expressing myself still. Then in 2016, I had a period of really dark depression. Didn't know what to do with myself. Did CBT therapy, did hypnotherapy, did counselling. Nothing worked. No talk therapy worked whatsoever. Got worse and worse and worse. It was only when I came across a therapy which was kind of a Jungian therapy, which was about archetypal kind of masculine energies, and then eventually came across actually through these psychedelics, realizing there was something internally that needed to kind of come out in a very different way. I then found bioenergetics and this more kind of body-based therapy. It was part of what I was doing with the Jungian stuff, but it was an exploration that I needed to do, and part of that was kind of dance and things like that. So that's where I've come from. I've done a lot of internal kind of searching with regards to this. So yeah, this is basically what I've learned and what's helped me along the way. So I'm going to mainly talk about bioenergetics and my kind of theories around that. So the basis of that was psychoanalysis, Sigmund Freud, obviously talk therapy. Then Wilhelm Reich became one of his students in Vienna, and he was more interested in how the expression of trauma was more isolated in the body. And I mean, if you read Wilhelm Reich's kind of biography and about what he did, he's quite a bit of a madman. He got kind of mad hair there. he was very alternative in the way he was working, and he basically, I'll go on to the next slide. Basically, on the left you see kind of the Freudian setup, which was basically Freud would sit off away from the patient, and the patient wouldn't even look at the therapist. They'd be kind of completely in their own space. And then on the right, it's this is Alexander Lowen, because basically what Reich did, he basically turned towards the patient and met them as a human being, and then realizing he could see there was something, their kind of what they were, their trauma was in somewhere in their body. There was tensions in the body, so he started using massage as a way of kind of releasing those tensions and breath work, and so he actually started touching the patients, and that's why it was a bit controversial at the time. And he yeah, a lot of the stuff he talked about, he basically came up with the phrase sexual revolution. He talks a lot about the orgasm and how that is a kind of full body orgasm would be a kind of pure release of energy, all the tensions removed. You would be able to have a full body orgasm. And at the day, this is 1950s at the time, even Alexander Lowen at the time, it was talking about that in the like 50s, in the 50s was quite controversial. But for me, looking back at the kind of the stuff I've kind of had to look into, it rings true to me. Like the energetic side is very healing to whether it be massage therapy or kind of more subtle like energetic stuff like in qigong. It's very much inside the body. So yeah, Alexander Lowen saying here, we learn studying the past, so a person can grow only by strengthening his roots in his own past, and a person's past is his body. So it's not just in the head. We hold trauma in the body. There's a couple of books that are really good to read. I'm not going to go so much into trauma on this, but The Body Keeps a Score is a good book on this, and When the Body Says No by Gabor Mate is a good book on understanding how that trauma is held in the body. So basically, this is the kind of bioenergetic or Reichian therapy process, is that as a baby, as a child, there's a kind of natural kind of ease to the body because there's no tensions yet. We're kind of very free. There's a certain, I'll get onto it later, there may actually be influences in the womb based on how the mother feels about the child. But that's, I won't go into that too much, but that can be an issue. But the idea is that the childlike energy, the kind of the lack of tension, they're just kind of expressing themselves as and when they want, and then through parents or through kind of social conditioning, there's a trauma or stress, and that doesn't need to be something that's kind of violence or anything like that. That is trauma, but it can also be quite subtle things. It can be emotional manipulation by the parents, or it can be something like, I want to play with my toys, and the parent says no, and so it's basically the childlike kind of expansion is being slowly kind of boxed in, because it kind of needs to happen in order to go into society and not be a kind of wild person. You need to be kind of like slowly kind of like restricted, and that in a sense is a kind of a trauma, because they're restricting this kind of this energy that they have, and this is called in Reichian therapy muscular armoring. So basically, the picture on the left there shows someone who wants to get a punch out. Say if they're a child and they're wanting to punch out, but they know they can't because it's not right, because they've been told by their parents. So they kind of clench their fists, and it's kind of internalized. Also, kind of there's a kind of retreat in the body, like kind of like shoulders up sort of thing, neck in, almost like a turtle, or a clenching of the jaw. So especially in my family, there was this phrase, even like it was said in jest, it was just like, shut up, like, oh, shut up. It was constant shut up, shut up, shut up. My dad was quite an angry person. There was a lot of anger in the family, so it kind of becomes kind of, I'm not supposed to say anything, because if I say anything, my dad might do something, or I'll say, or just say something wrong at school or something like that. I'll get bullied. So it kind of gets locked into the jaw, and the jaw becomes more tense. And these can be quite subtle. It doesn't mean, you know, we're really kind of like, you know, it's kind of obvious. It can be a very subtle thing. So yeah, that stops the what Reich call the orgastic potency, or the orgastic wave. So it's like that sense that like the natural pleasure is that we have, if all those tensions were gone, we would, in our body, we would feel a sort of pleasure of just sitting and being, and we don't have that because we've got all these tensions. Yes, partly they're psychological, but for me, I found, especially through meditation, is that actually when you kind of let those kind of tensions go, there's a kind of natural underlying sort of bliss there, and that's talked about in Buddhism quite a bit. So yeah, animals don't necessarily have this, because they don't kind of listen to kind of, it's very different for them, so they tend to shake out their stress. I remember I was walking down the street once, and there was this very small dog, and he was walking past a big dog. And the big dog, I think the big dog was in behind a fence or something, and he suddenly started barking at him like, ruh, 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 like really like loud. And the small dog just suddenly like stopped with his own on the leash, and we're just like looking. It was kind of petrified. And then the dog stopped barking, and the small dog just like shook like this. And the owner was like, come on, what are you doing? And he shook, and then he just got on his way, shaking out all those tensions. Because what, you know, it becomes this fight or flight. So this is polyvagal theory. I won't go into this, but this is kind of, it's not quite scientifically proven. This is a case, it's more broad strokes, but the idea is that there's either fight or flight or freeze, and how this is within our nervous system, this kind of process actually happens. I was going to show you a video of an animal actually shaking, but I think you can get the picture. There's a famous video of an impala being attacked by a leopard, and the leopard suddenly goes away, and then the impala starts shaking. So this actually happens. Yeah, these two books are kind of good to read on this kind of trauma. So Wilhelm Reich found that there were 5 basic, initially it was 4, but then he came up with a 5th, basic holding patterns. And these aren't necessarily kind of like steadfast, this is exactly how people hold themselves, but he kind of, it's almost like an archetype of certain holding patterns based on certain traumas at different ages. So I'll go into those. So this is the first one. So pre-birth, as I said, it can happen in the womb. That the baby can pick up on the rejection from the mother, and also up until the first year. And the main thing because I'm not a bioenergetic therapist, so I don't fully understand this or have an experience of this. You can kind of get a sense of this. I think this is what I'm trying to, for me, this is a game changer, the fact that we can hold this sort of kind of psychology in our bodies. So it had to have a general sense of this, I think is quite interesting. But for me, I look more at the energy and this image at the bottom left, which is about how the energy is held in the system. So for the leaving pattern, which originally was called oral, it's basically the energy is held very, like, it's kind of completely contained in the body. The limbs become quite loose because of this, or there can be a stiffness. So basically the arrows represent energy. So the energy is not getting out into the arms or limbs. It's kind of retracted into the system. At the bottom, there's a trainer called Elliot Hulse, and he's related these to the neo-Jungian archetypes. I'm not sure this quite works as his theory, but I think it's quite interesting because the oral or leaving pattern, they're basically not in their bodies at all, they're stuck in their heads. So this tendency for magician qualities, if you know anything about the King Warrior Lover magician. Emerging pattern, first 2 years. Yep, so this is kind of a neediness because there's no connection with the mother. So there's low energy, and when it's almost like they need energy from external means. The arrows, the dotted lines on the arrows mean there's not this kind of weak energy that's coming into the system. And usually the body will elongate. I'm not quite sure why that is. This is a lover feeling. So the merging pattern, lover is someone who kind of like merges with the kind of oneness of things and is kind of like in the feeling of things. And yeah. Enduring pattern, originally called the masochist. Yeah, the original names for these were quite psychopath and masochist. They were quite the original Freudian terms. So these are the kind of the newer terms. So yeah, this is, as I say, for me, it's more the energy. They might not have a physical structure that is kind of heavy set for this one, but it might just be the energy of a kind of stuck, sort of like sedentary, sort of like, as it says, kind of the suppression of something, suppression of joy, because it was kind of externally controlled, so they've internalized that. Yeah. Aggressive pattern, originally called psychotic. Apparently this type of person won't even think about going to therapy. So it's kind of something that's not really, there's not really kind of a way of dealing with this. But yeah, bottom left, there's more energy in this, but it's kind of directed upwards towards the head and kind of like the kind of ego, so very ego led, and then there's kind of cut off in the kind of sexual area, the groin. It's all about kind of manipulation from the head. We all, I think personally, especially looking at myself, I think we all have elements of this within us. I'm especially this rigid pattern. I was a perfectionist for a long time. I was very kind of contained and in my body. So there's like a good pulse of energy in the rigid pattern, but it almost doesn't get out. It doesn't connect with the outside world. It's just kind of stuck. Yeah. So these are the kind of basic holding patterns. So how do we get out of these structures? These are almost like physical prisons. Like we slowly, and we do this in order to protect ourselves. It's nothing bad. We do it because obviously we don't want to come to harm, whether that's someone being angry at us. So we kind of like clench ourselves. So we're trying to protect ourselves. It's like a hedgehog going into like that position, a curled up position. So actually, it's something that at the younger age, it was what we needed to do in order to feel safe. But over the years, it kind of gets stuck and it doesn't kind of come out, kind of get released back into that kind of more open position. So how can we do that? One of the main things, as was showing, was the breath. The breath can become quite shallow, especially in that kind of fight or flight. And the diaphragm kind of, it doesn't really expand properly. It's taken me a long time through breath work to really understand how much capacity my lungs have. Like I've done breath holds and breath work, and I'm like, it's quite it's good to kind of like know that you have more kind of in you to expand into. As I say, like the diaphragm is a muscle as well, so it can hold a lot. It can hold tension, or just kind of not quite expand as much as it should do. So breathing is a big part of bioenergetics. So the two main positions, exercises in bioenergetics are the bow and the arch. So the bow on the left is actually a qigong position, but without the hands on the, actually, is that on next? Yeah, I'll show you the qigong position, similar to that. So basically, actually, I'll show you the next slide. So the dog on the top right is basically, he's completely exposed and he's having a belly tickle. So he's vulnerable. So he's open and he's relaxed and he's in connection with the owner through the belly tickle. So that's the kind of the idea that you're, instead of being safe and closed, you're opening yourself up to the world. And you're allowing that kind of vulnerable spot, because the vulnerable spot is basically your lips, because you kiss, it's kind of emotional, your jaw, your jugular, your chest and your heart, and kind of your genitals as well. That's kind of your soft areas. So it's that idea that it's the exposure of that makes you kind of release those tensions. And then the bow is the opposite way. So you kind of releasing tension from the back, especially the lower back. I think there's emphasis on that polyvagal theory. I can't quite remember. Yeah, so there's the arch. You can do this on this is the top left is like what Alexander Lowen kind of contraption, but I've done this on a gym ball, like bottom right. It's very, and you kind of breathe into this. It's deep breaths into the belly, and then allowing the expansion of the chest and in the shoulders. It's a really good exercise to do. And this can release. So I've done this on both the ball, and there's another thing we can do, and this isn't something that I researched, which is just something I kind of came up with myself, and that was hanging. Something I got from Ido Portal. It's really good for your shoulders to hang from a pull-up bar, so your feet are dangling, and you'll get like an extension of the spine. And I remember once I was doing this, and my pelvic area just kind of, there was just a kind of almost like a release in my pelvic area. And as I say, this kind of natural pleasure that comes up, it almost released something. I literally had to stop hanging, and I started laughing for about a minute, like this big like belly laugh. And it just showed me that I was holding a lot of tension basically in my stomach and in my groin, and it really released that. And that's something that Basically, I think, so this one is the qigong position, similar to the bow, is top left. There's a similar position in yoga as well. For me, the reason people are scared of facing this kind of darkness of their trauma and their shadow, basically, and I think this comes out in modern culture through horror films, especially it's almost like we know this. So in The Exorcist, and exorcism is quite interesting, especially The Exorcist. These sorts of films, it's always a young girl that's kind of it's happening to. And I think it's because basically in the film The Exorcist, she's about 13, she's going into puberty. There's almost like this, they're in a culture of repression, which is Christian ideology. And because they're not connecting with sexuality, it's repressed. And then when they go into the menstrual cycle at a young age, it's almost like the sexuality is like pushed down, and it needs to be expressed. And because it's not being allowed to express, it comes out in this kind of strange way. It needs to be somehow released. So this kind of exorcism is almost like these kind of dark, devilish demons that we hold inside, which is just our sexuality, and it's expressed in this way. So it's ironic or just like apt that there's always these contortions in exorcism or images of exorcism, and they're literally the same as these release patterns in bioenergetics. And also the bottom right, where she's kind of, her mouth is like wide open, it's almost like a scream. That's another bioenergetic thing, is to release tension from the jaw. So it's all these things, they're in the culture, but it's almost like we're scared of facing them in our own reality. So we kind of project them and we make them dark, and we kind of become scared by them. So it's quite interesting. Top right is is a deleted scene from The Exorcist. It's called The Spider Walk. She walks down the stairs on her back and she flips over and sticks the tongue out, and it's kind of like a reptile tongue. And I'll get into the kind of imagery of the snake as the kind of our primal force later on. Okay, there's another thing called TRE, which is trauma or tension release exercises. This is something I discovered without even knowing it existed. I was basically doing 5 rhythms, which I'll go into later. It's a form of dance, and I was releasing all this energy, and then I got into my car, and I put my foot on the accelerator and get a clutch, and my legs went open, like the image at the bottom right, and this sudden like shuddering started happening out of nowhere. Didn't feel anything emotionally, it was just kind of shuddering in the body, and I was like, I don't know what this is. Happened again, and then I came across trauma release exercises. Basically, you tire the muscles out to a point where it kind of taps into the tension that's being held, the kind of trauma that's being held in those muscles, especially the psoas muscle top left. We hold a lot of tension in that muscle, especially sitting down. And a lot of our kind of, if we've got a lot of sexual tension that can be held in that groin area as well. And this is something, it's an interesting one, because you don't have to, it's not like you become emotional doing it. You don't start crying. Not that from my experience. You just literally sit there and just watch your legs shake. It's quite strange, and it happens of its own accord. You don't do it. It just kind of, the feeling I got from doing this was almost like I was running away. Almost like all those times when I'd kind of had to stand my ground and kind of repress all this kind of like fear or whatever. I was suddenly allowed to do this running that I wanted to do at the time. So it was almost like my legs were running away. That was the feeling I got anyway. I'm not sure if that's true. If that's a literal kind of mechanism, I don't know, but that's what it felt like. Once we open up to this kind of like this position and we loosen all this tension, we can also do it as a postural feedback effect, which is the idea that if you kind of stand with your chest open, and Jordan Peterson on the right talks a lot about the lobster, the kind of like the kind of the, can't remember the term, but the back of the lobster becomes more convex when it's kind of it's beating its opponent. So we can almost tap into this by opening ourselves up. You know, like Superman is basically showing us his groin. It's like showing us all his vulnerable parts. He's saying, I'm so powerful, I can just kind of stand here, and you know, and it's quite energetic. It's quite an energetic thing. Okay, on to Kung Fu. This is my expertise. I just like that picture. I don't know why I put it in. Okay, so this book, Possible Origins, it goes into how, by Scott Parker Phillips, quite interesting. I'm going to try and tie this in to what I'm talking about. Basically, back before the Communist Revolution, Scott Parker Phillips theorizes, and he did a lot of research around it, is that theatre, religion and martial arts weren't actually separate. They were separated within the Communist Revolution. That actually before then, especially in ancient China, they were one thing. They were completely tied together. So the shamanism was tapping into spirit, animal spirits, and was channeling them, and it was kind of like moving like an animal. That's what happens in Shaolin Kung Fu. We express, you know, we do an animal form like a crane, or like seeing Kung Fu Panda, all the different animals. It's like almost like channeling of the spirit, and that kind of relates back to the exorcism I was talking about. It's almost like we're allowing our body to get into other positions than the human position. So it's releasing those patterns we get into. If you know anything about psychedelics, they basically shut down the default mode network and allow different modes of thinking to happen. I think we can tap into this through martial arts and dance by allowing our body to move in different ways other than the ways we normally move. It can kind of release all these tensions that we hold up. Top left, Journey to the West, otherwise known as Monkey. Obviously channeling the animal, the kind of primal energy. I'll get into that. Quite an interesting story, how he goes from being like a monkey, like the monkey mind's like very kind of chaotic energy, and then slowly over time he becomes more disciplined and he kind of refines that energy. Scott Parker Phillips says that there's the position, the kind of Junbei position in martial arts. This is basically because we kind of bow at the end of a sequence. Not always, sometimes it's this, but a lot of martial arts you do this. He basically says it's basically taming the chaos. So like the monkey kind of slowly tames his like monkey mind of the chaos. It's like, this is the chaos, this is the like force into the world, and it can do a lot of harm. And this is saying I've disciplined it, I have stopped it, and that's his kind of theory. And I think it's really kind of apt as to what martial arts is. Something that Jordan Peterson says about a good man is not a kind man. A good man is a violent man who knows how to control it. So yeah. Again, like the modern example of theatre, religion, and martial arts is the lion dance. The reason why it's religious is because in Chinatown, in Manchester, they basically go around each, on Chinese New Year, they go around each business and shop and supermarket, and they pay these dancers to dance outside, and it's almost like this kind of energetic kind of exorcism of negative energy. And there's something very similar that happens in Senegal with the lion dance there as well, and it's kind of like a similar thing. These lion men go out into the street and dance like lions, and it's almost like an exorcism. Okay, going on to Gabrielle Roth. Okay, so she says, in many shamanic societies, if you came to a medicine person complaining of being disheartened, dispirited, or depressed, they would ask for one of 4 questions. When did you stop dancing? When did you stop singing? When did you stop being enchanted by stories? When did you stop being comforted by the sweet territory of silence? So yeah, Gabrielle Roth is, she came up with 5 rhythms, which is basically a kind of dance therapy. Originally kind of, it would just be a drummer drumming, and you would kind of move to the drum. now it's done more with kind of DJ music and things. It's when it's not five rhythms trademark, it's usually called ecstatic dance. And through the five rhythms kind of process or class, we'll go through the 5 rhythms, obviously. The first one is flowing. So it's almost like this is kind of the start of kind of the session. So it's kind of easing into the body, and the rhythm is quite soft, and this is usually guided by the head of the session. So originally Gabra Roth, and now the people she's taught. And then the wave goes into, it's called a wave, so it then goes into staccato, which is a bit more kind of like angular, and a bit more rhythmic, which eventually builds up into chaos. So this is kind of the peak of the wave, where everything becomes chaotic, and there's a bit less control in the movement of the dance. Then it's lyrical, so it kind of slowly goes down into a more kind of light movement, and then into stillness. So you become absolutely still, or you can still express stillness within the body through movement, like a kind of almost like a Tai Chi movement. This for me always like massive with regards to overcoming tensions in the body. I didn't go to a bioenergetic therapist because there wasn't really one around I could find. So I used 5 rhythms as a way of tapping into, as I say, different modes of being for who I am. As I say, it was very rigid. It allowed me to, through these rhythms, express myself in numerous capacities. So it wasn't just one mode of being, which normally we have. We kind of have a very tendency for our physicality, except maybe when we work out or run, it tends to be quite one note. When we do 5 rhythms, you go through every kind of mode of expression you can possibly kind of do, or you're encouraged to do so. Yeah. And this was done by shamans. It's a reference to shamanism. This is Zhang Beto, which is a voodoo guardian. I'm going to show a video of one of these. Okay. So this is, I'm not sure you're going to be able to hear this, but basically this is. I'm not sure if you could hear that, but you get the basic idea of the kind of movement, and because the shaman was doing that in the tribe, is almost like, as I say, like the lion dance, shaking up these energies within his body, and therefore, because we have like a mirror neuron, we kind of almost like feel like we're doing things that other people are doing, and because we're in beating the drum or in communion with that, we kind of feel like those energies are being shifted. So it's not necessarily trauma release, it's just kind of release of the stress of the day or the stresses of societal kind of restrictions. And usually a shaman would be a kind of a trickster character and would kind of go in to shake things up. And it's almost like these bioenergetic therapies are, or Reichian or whatever, they're shaking up the kind of like tension, the kind of borders that we put in place for ourselves. Again, the dogs do this, shaking themselves. Right, this is a theory I've got, just my own theory. Obviously, Michael Jackson is a controversial figure. I'm sure we know why, but I think he, in a way, was almost like a modern day version of what this is, and he kind of showed that through the fact that he always was transforming into something. The name Moonwalker is a very Native American. He was neither black nor white. He was neither male nor female. He communed with the dead. He defied kind of gravity, sort of thing. He was very shamanic, but he didn't do so in a way that was kind of knowledgeable of what he was doing. It wasn't handed down to him by a previous shaman in his tribe.
he was done so in a way that he was projected all over the world, and he was released. He obviously had trauma, and he was kind of releasing that through the work. I think that can be done in an artful way. Obviously, there's problems with what Michael Jackson did, but I think it's an example of how trauma can be released in a way that's there's an art to it. That it's not just about shaking and doing something chaotic. There can be some sort of symbolic kind of embodiment of something symbolic and meaningful. Talking about black and white, this is exactly what the Hayoka, the trickster, the sacred clown in the Lakota, the Sioux tribes was doing. So he kind of did the opposite of everything that everyone else is doing in order to kind of shake up the mentality of the tribe to make sure things weren't becoming stagnant. He kind of rode back, horseback backwards. There's all this kind of like opposing things. So like bioenergetics, like the exorcism example, is that it's going to look strange doing this stuff in order to release these tensions, because it's a case of getting out of our kind of straitjacket that society put on us. But I would say there needs to be a space held for this. So the martial arts is a good space, because obviously, like, we've got the power, but we've also got the control. We've got the chaos, the potential chaos of the control. So it's not just about this sort of releasing of this energy. It's about controlling the energy as well. Again, kind of tribal society, Aborigines knew the kind of power of the body, and they basically, the Aborigines, they talked about how there's 3 brains, and this is kind of shown in neuroscience. They talked about the gut being the first brain, that the kind of gut instinct was the most important thing. That's how they hunted, through gut instinct. Then there's the heart, which is an emotional center, and the feeling and the connection with the tribe. That was the second most important brain. And the third bottom rung was the actual brain. And they called it the Nandu Karu, which means tangled fish net. So basically, they didn't really pay attention to thought process. Really, they just kind of lived in the moment. And I think that's quite important for us to kind of understand that there's more going on than what's going on above the neck. There's a lot more going on in the body. Again, this is shown in myth as well. The green man is quite prevalent in especially English myth. I've been looking especially into English stuff, and that shows that the Sir Gawain in the Green Knight. So the Green Knight comes into King Arthur's castle and challenges someone to kill him, and Sir Gawain lops off his head. He's still alive after that. He kind of challenges him again after he lops off his head. He's almost saying that his body's still alive. He doesn't kind of need his head. His body is just as important. It's almost like that primal energy of the body. And we see this a lot in the Green Man. This bottom right is actually a photograph from my hometown, Knutsford, which does it's called the May Day every year. And the Green Man is a big part of that, and is very much the primal nature of he goes through the town. He's almost the trickster saying, like Knutsford nowadays is like full of like footballers and Lamborghinis and Land Rovers. He's almost like going saying, like, you're actually nature, you're actually a primal being. It's like, yeah, and that's very similar to this guy. So yeah. Yeah, I'm not sure how long I've got, but probably not too long. So going back to Freud, he talks about the superego, the ego, and the id. So basically, the id is the primal urge that's within us. The superego is societal or parental kind of control over that, and the ego is us in the middle. And we're kind of having to kind of delegate between those two, our natural urges and the kind of responsibilities, again, the discipline and the chaos almost. The primal energy, obviously, the snake kind of is similar to our spine. It's the release of this in what's called a Kundalini awakening in Hinduism. Basically, I think Kundalini awakening is actually just the release of these kind of societal tensions or the internal tensions, and getting back to that kind of natural kind of mode of being that we had when we were children. You know, we build up all these tensions over time when we get older. I think Kundalini awakening is actually just us getting back to kind of those kind of more free energies. And I think it can be overhyped, especially in the spiritual community. But I'm still connected with, I think the chakras is a very good map in order to understand our psychology in the body. It can help us isolate certain aspects of who we are. For me, it's been good to isolate the kind of throat chakra, because I've had trouble communicating and talking. I don't do very much talking as an artist. So it's helped me just isolate that out and concentrate on that and kind of work on that. Yeah, and also in martial arts, a thing called a ki, so it's a shout, and this is very, when you do it properly, I'm just going to show you a video of it being done properly. Can you just put a thumbs up if you heard the last clip? Oh, okay. So I'm not sure how I share audio. Right, well, I won't share that then. Okay. So basically the ki should come from the whole body, not just the, in fact, you can probably just watch it without the audio. So the guy on the right, watch his whole body as he does a ki. Look where it comes from, and is all the way up from his, well, he says dancien, but actually it's coming from his feet. When you do it properly, it's like the whole body is engaged in that. And ki has been something that I've kind of engaged with in order to connect with that. I'll do this quickly because I've not got long left. So Chinese medicine is seen as something quite esoteric and kind of not really relating to scientific methods, but actually based on Sparking the Machine by Dr. Daniel Kieran, he's basically found that the acupuncture points are the same points when we were embryos. They're called organizing centers, and they basically were the centers like nodes where when our arm grew, it needed to know to become a finger or an elbow or a foot. So there'd be these specific nodes in order to create the next thing along that line. And he's basically realized they line up perfectly with the acupuncture points. Same thing with fascial planes in the body. The fascia basically covers all the organs in the body, covers a lot of the body. Basically realize they have very similar alignment with the acupuncture channels, the meridians in the body. And also the idea of qi and energy. The fascia is actually a really good conductor of electricity. You need to read more about this in Sparking Machine. It's like an amazing description of all this. Yeah. For me, as I said, like qigong and active relaxation is really important, to not just do something which you fully relax your system, like sleep, say, and not something that activates your system, like running or working out. That there's a midpoint, and that's what qigong is. It's dan sun gong, active relaxation, important to ground. The science behind why that's good for you. There's other ways of doing that. There's this thing called a Tai Chi rule I discovered fairly recently, where it puts your attention on a kind of object, and it connects the acupuncture points on your hands, and it's a good kind of meditation. You kind of do repetitive movements with this ruler, movements. So yeah, I would say lose the Fitbit, lose the technology, stop the external kind of chatter. I think it's really important through meditation or through these practices is to really understand what's going on internally and really feel what's going on, and not just think about it. There's one thing to understand this, like I'm talking about it and its ideas and things. It's a very different thing to actually feel what's going on in your body, and that's the term is called interoception. These are things that I do in order to improve energy and connect with these things in different ways. So cold showers while swimming, that can energize the body, but it can also discharge kind of tensions in the body. Heat therapy is good for it. Holotropic breath work, Wim Hof is like a short version of holotropic breath work. Holotropic breath work is where you really do like an hour of breathing, deep breath, and that can really shift energy in the body. I'm starting to do breath holds, which is another, is deepening the breath as well, and it's also a good death practice. You're facing your own death when you hold your breath. I think that's going to become the next fashionable thing to do after Wim Hof. Yeah, it's a good guide to look at his Stig breathology, the kind of basics of that. Hanging, as I said, embodied meditation, embodied workout. Just because we're doing a workout doesn't mean we can't kind of feel into what's happening in the body. In fact, I would say I've released I've had a lot of places where I've kind of held back anger. So I think sometimes when you work out, to really tap into that anger is quite important, to kind of really push past your limits. In fact, I was in the gym once and I started really grunting, like really going for it, and this guy next to me had been completely silent, just started suddenly like not copying me, just he started like grunting and like letting it out with his voice as well. And I think that's, if we can encourage that kind of, you know, sometimes they say doing workouts is almost like it's they call it firefighting, where you're actually it's almost like an addiction and you're pressing trauma down. In fact, I think if you really know how to do it, you can tap into that trauma. Another one, recent one, is Way of the Rope. Tim Sheath has been doing that recently. He came from a guy called David Weck, who's a bit of a madman. But I think when, like Reich, I think you have to be a bit mad in order to tap into these new ideas. And it's basically using a rope to understand the mechanics of the body and how we kind of move, you know, loosening up the motion of the body, especially in running, and helps in martial arts and tennis and all sorts. So yeah, that's a quick stop kind of like overview of everything I've kind of learned over the past like 6 or so years, and I think it's kind of fractal. There's a lot of stuff there you could like open up a whole kind of you know, information about, which you know, is up to you to do. But yeah, that's basically it.